We're going to start today's lecture with Chapter 7. So I will share my screen so it pops up. Hopefully we'll all be able to read it. So Chapter 7 is on metamorphism and metamorphic rocks. These are a little different from the other two types of rocks we've talked about. A metamorphic rock starts out as a rock and then turns into a different type of rock. So it may start out as a sedimentary rock and then undergo tremendous changes in temperature and pressure, and now it's a metamorphic rock. It might start out as a metamorphic rock and turn into a different metamorphic rock, or as an igneous rock and then turn into a metamorphic rock. Regardless, it's increases in temperature and pressure that will transform a pre-existing rock into a new and different rock. So the composition, it's usually been changed in either mineral composition or texture. Texture is really common. Mineral composition, to a certain extent, sometimes it requires the addition of water brought in again by these changes in temperature and pressure. The rock you start out with is the protolith. It's the parent rock. And the whole object of the metamorphism is that the parent rock needs to be stable in its new environment. So if it's hotter than it used to, then things shift around to make it stable in that new hotter environment. We have another key feature is that metamorphic rocks always form at depth. You can't form them on the surface. A sedimentary rock could be a surface formed rock, and igneous rock can certainly be surface formed. Metamorphic rocks are never formed at the surface. They're always formed deep underground. Now we find them at the surface. This part of North Carolina has a lot of metamorphic rocks, but that's because of the mountain range, the Appalachian Mountains. You can see in this first little graphic, I'm sorry for the poor contrast, the blue area are areas where there's a lot of metamorphic rock visible at the surface. So you can see a great deal of Canada has metamorphic rock. There's metamorphic rock along the western part of the United States, down along the mountain range on the west coast, and the mountain range in the mid part of the continent, the Rocky Mountains, and along the Appalachian Mountains, which is where we're located. And you can see then there are metamorphic rocks also visible down in Central America. To give you maybe a little bit more colorful view of things, this graphic shows you where you would predominantly find sedimentary, igneous, and metamorphic rocks. And so you can see the metamorphic is the pinkish color. And again, here's our band along the Appalachian Mountains. Here's the band throughout Canada. There's some in the Rockies. And they're not showing the western part as much as the previous example did. The blue is for igneous and the yellow is for sedimentary. It should be no surprise that there so many sedimentary rocks form along a coastline. So let's look at some of the factors that control metamorphic rock characteristics. We have the composition of the parent rock. Remember that the parent rock is the protolith. And so that's your raw ingredients. That's what you start out with. And the chemicals in the parent rock can be rearranged, but you don't make brand new chemicals out of nothing. So they can be rearranged and reshaped, but not new ones introduced. Temperature and pressure is also a controlling factor. A mineral is stable at a unique set of temperatures and pressures. And when you change those, you change the kind of minerals that you'll see. There's something called the Bowen reaction series. We'll mention it in our Metamorphic Rocks lab that shows you how certain minerals are stable at unique temperatures. So the pressure changes will change the texture of the rock. We have two types of pressure that we talk about: confining pressure and directed pressure. So confining pressure reduces the pore space. It changes the amount of open space in a rock. It's sometimes called geostatic pressure. If you want to think of it as you've got a ball and you squeeze all the way around, as long as the forces that you exert are uniform, that's confining pressure. Directed pressure is different. Directed pressure, sometimes called differential stress, means that you have greater pressure in one direction compared to another. So if I took and I only squeezed in from the sides, that's directed pressure. Or if I took and I only squeezed from top to bottom, that's directed pressure. It tends to give you a layered look to your rock, and we refer to layered metamorphic rocks as foliated metamorphic rocks. You've got two types of differential stress. One is compressive stress, and it only acts to flatten the minerals that are in the rock. We'll scroll up a little bit. So you can see you've got a random orientation of light and dark minerals, for example, in granite. When you have directed pressure, just pushing in from the sides, what it tends to do is force the minerals into a pattern that it's almost like it's got little lines, like you can see the layers in it. And now we have the metamorphic rock gneiss, and that's spelled G-N-E-I-S-S. The G is silent. So granite on the left, gneiss on the right, with that silent leading G. And we can also have a shearing effect. So we've talked about how compressive, it gives you the layers. We got that in the previous example for the gneiss. But if you have shearing, shearing is when there's a rolling motion to go along with it. So the forces are exerted, but they compress and roll at the same time. And what that does is it takes some of the minerals, and instead of just sort of making little layers out of them, it rolls them up and makes little balls. An example of that is Oggen gneiss. It is a specific type of the metamorphic rock gneiss. Oggen is the German word for eye, and you'll see why when we look at a photograph of it. So again, you've got confining pressure, pushing in uniformly in all directions just reduces the pore space. Tension would be pulling out. That's a form of directed pressure. Compression would be pushing in, again, directed pressure. And shear, it compresses and rolls at the same time. So this is, these are both photographs of Oggen gneiss. This is a larger scale one at the top. Oggen gneiss is a spotted rock. You'll have large areas of round minerals in it that are light colored, usually surrounded by darker minerals. Here's a close-up of it. So they describe these large eye-shaped white minerals as giving it its distinctive look. It's black and white. Usually a black and white metamorphic rock is a kind of gneiss. If it's black and white, but the white has been rolled up into ball shapes, it's Oggen gneiss. So fluids will help to trigger a metamorphic chemical reaction. Fluids can be very influential in the kind of metamorphic rock you have. They can bring minerals in, they can bring minerals out, carry ions with it from location to location. All right, so let's talk about the classification of metamorphic rocks because we need some understanding of this for lab. So our lab on metamorphic rocks will let you look at these different kinds of rocks and make some decisions. So we'll classify our metamorphic rocks by their texture. Are they foliated or non-foliated? Remember, foliated means it has layers, non-foliated means it does not. And then we'll look at chemical composition. So some of the foliated metamorphic rocks have distinctive patterns associated with them. We refer to some of the layers as being slaty, And all that means is that they look like a piece of slate. It looks like you could take a sharp blade of a knife and pop this apart into individual sheets of it. It's a little like the video talking about the mica, in that the mica would pop apart, but in this instance, our layers are not nearly as thin as mica. So slate and shale both have layers. Slate and shale both have layers. Shale is a sedimentary rock, and when it undergoes metamorphism, it will turn into slate. Slate comes in different colors. That was a dark gray slate, but it could be red or a darker red or even a green or an almost blue color. So slate can come in a variety of colors. It's the characteristic that always gives it away is the fact that you have these distinctive layers that again look like you could take a knife and separate it. Then we have, unique to metamorphic rocks, the schistose layering. So this is sort of like a faux layering. When you look at a piece of schist, it looks like somebody has taken a sharp needle or a knife blade and carved in little fake layers on the edges. They do not look like you could pop them apart like we could the slate or like you could mica, but they look like somebody's tried to fool us. And so this is schist, is a metamorphic rock that exhibits this kind of layering. Again, you look at the edges, it looks like they're layers, but only sort of layers. A gneissic layering is when you have a light and a dark mineral in the same metamorphic rock. So here is an example of it, a black and white. This piece of gneiss probably started out as granite. Granite is an igneous rock. Here is another one of gneiss. Here's a pink and black one. And we saw earlier the ogden gneiss with the round up little balls. All right, there are different types of metamorphism. We have contact metamorphism, which is also called thermal metamorphism. This is a result of an igneous intrusion. So you have your country rock sitting there, and there is an igneous sill coming out. Remember, an igneous sill runs parallel to existing rock layers. So it runs out and intrudes into the country rock and heats it up, because for an igneous intrusion to ooze into existing rock, it has to be hot and fluid. In this photograph that we see, the dark band is the igneous intrusion. On either side of it is going to be metamorphic rock, because when the igneous intrusion oozed in, it heated up the rock that was there, the country rock, and it changed its nearest neighbor, turned it into a metamorphic rock. Now on the outer side, whatever this rock was to begin with, it still is. We also have regional or dynamothermal metamorphism. This happens along tectonic plates. So it's because the plates rub against each other, and this generates temperatures and pressures that change rocks. It normally impacts large areas. You can have progressive metamorphism because of this, so the rock will change as it moves along. Typically what you'll find is if you've got the two tectonic plates rubbing together, right next to the plate boundary, you'll find the greatest change in the rock. And as you move away from it, the changes become less noticeable until you finally get far enough away you can't see change at all. So there's a progressive change as you move away from the boundary. So we do talk about metamorphic grade. This is a measure of the degree of change that the parent rock has undergone. So if it's a high metamorphic grade, it has undergone a lot of change. If it is a low metamorphic grade, there's very minor changes going on. You can have prograde and retrograde metamorphism. Prograde means that the rock changes to a higher grade metamorphic rock, and retrograde means it goes backwards, changes to a lower grade one. So again, the graphic, if we move to the right, the temperatures increase. So we would expect our metamorphic grades to increase going to the right. Sorry about this. On the left-hand side, as we come down, the pressures increase, so we would expect our metamorphic grades to increase. And you can see we're going from shale to slate to schist to gneiss to migmatite, which we will not have an example of in class. Here's some other examples. I know it says mother rock, but that's the protolith, the parent rock. So if you start out with granite and it undergoes metamorphism, regional metamorphism, it'll turn into gneiss. If you start out with mudstone, which is a kind of sandstone, it would turn into shale. If it started out as sandstone, it would turn into quartzite. If it starts out as limestone, it'll turn into marble. Our last type of metamorphism is impact metamorphism. This is when a meteorite strikes the surface of the earth. And so most meteorites, when they enter the Earth's atmosphere, it generates a huge amount of heat and a pressure wave. And so it's this heat and the pressure wave that impacts the Earth. First, it'll come down in, and the end result is you'll have an impact crater. Impact metamorphism is the major type of metamorphism on the moon. It'll impact intermediate size areas. So not too big, not too small. Remember, so this is a photograph of Barringer Crater, which is an impact crater in Arizona. If you were going to see the Grand Canyon, this would be on your way from Hickory, North Carolina. It was created when a 300,000 ton meteorite traveling at 26,000 miles per hour struck the Earth. Huge force. Now, as I said earlier, it generates a huge amount of heat as the meteorite enters the Earth's atmosphere, which means typically you don't see the meteorite in the bottom of the crater. Normally, the crater is caused by the pressure wave that leads, and the meteorite itself is oftentimes consumed or broken up on impact and will fly out. I have been to this particular crater. The rocks all along the rim have a really bubbly texture to them. They're really kind of neat. They've filmed some parts of movies here. They don't let you go down into the bottom of the crater, but it still is impressive. It's an amazing thing to go see. So you can see here, let's see if we've got some more graphic with it. It's about 1,200 meters in diameter and about 170 meters deep. And it was nifty, I confess. All right, so plate tectonics and metamorphism. I've already said that if you have your plates together, as you move away from the plates, the metamorphism will be less and less. So high grade next to the plate contact area, lower and lower grade as you separate. How do we know this? Well, we look at the minerals that are in the ground, and minerals solidify at different temperatures. So the minerals tell us the temperature, which helps us plot what's called an isotherm. That's a line that connects points with the same temperature. And that helps us determine the metamorphic grade of the rock. So chlorite solidifies at a low temperature, so it's a low-grade metamorphic rock. Kyanite solidifies at a high temperature, so it's a high-grade metamorphic rock. Isograds are lines that indicate the first appearance of your index metamorphic minerals on the ground. So we don't actually plot the temperatures, we plot the minerals, which gives us the isograds, which gives us the isotherms. It's all a lot of deductive reasoning when you get right down to it. So again, close to the heat source, high grade, and the farther away you get, the lower the grade. So when we look at a rock, we look at all of the minerals in the rock. That's called the mineral assemblage. And that's going to give us indications of the temperature and pressure that the rock was under. The rocks that have the same mineral assemblages are members of the same metamorphic facies. And that means they solidified during the same general conditions. Again, it's all deductive reasoning. We're deducing things based on the data. So let's look at a graphic for some metamorphic facies. So across the bottom, you can see we have temperature, low on the left, higher on the right. Pressure, low at the top, higher as you go down. And the depth, high at the close to its ground level at the top, and as you go down, it's deeper and deeper. So you can see that hornfels are stable at a wide range of temperatures, but a very narrow pressure band. That green schists have a very narrow temperature range and a very narrow pressure range. And that granulites have a really broad pressure, but again, a relatively narrow temperature range. All of this tells a geologist a lot more than we will ever want to know. And that stops us, so we will stop this, and you should be ready for the lab on metamorphic rock.